Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this brief ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Looking back at yesterday's severe weather reports, we had 593 separate reports added to the list. And what I'm talking about here is that since the beginning of December, we're almost at 1,400 separate severe weather reports, including 127 reports of tornadoes. This massive line of storms went racing out of parts of the plains here all the way into Wisconsin. Did so at a very quick speed. Average storm speed was approaching 60 to 70 miles an hour. And the storms on top of that were producing their own winds, which is why we had almost 550 reports of severe wind damage. Now, thinking about this, I also want to show you the National Weather Service, and this is a picture that was put out on Twitter by Severe Studios. Great follow here, but they showed all of the different warning boxes for severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Yesterday was an extremely active day. And of course, on the back side of that, we saw incredibly strong synoptic scale winds just lifting the very dry soil and the dust here, pulling it into the circulation. In fact, I want to go show you that really quickly on some satellite imagery. You see, this animation you're watching here shows that as that storm system came out of Colorado yesterday morning, it moved through Kansas, into Nebraska, and eventually into Iowa in a total span of about 7 hours. This thing was really moving. And as you see the storms popping up here on the satellite on the backside, it's very clear how expansive and widespread that dust event was. After the sun set, we got a good idea of the fires that were going on here, because as we flipped over to infrared, you could see the signature of the fires here on satellites. We had massive fires in parts of Kansas as well. But you put this whole event together, and it was quite devastating. On the kind of beginnings of all of this, remember, this was a deeper trough that went into the west first. And looking back over the last 3 days of total accumulated snowfall, I mean, you can see here in the Sierra Nevada, some places picking up between 4 and 8 feet of snow. Big snows got into the central part of the Rockies here, and the same thing for this part, just north of the Snake River Valley here in the Payette National Forest and Salmon, Valley here. It's incredible to see the amount of snow we got out of this. But what I want to focus in on is really an important part of this flow pattern we've seen as of late, and this is what I'm referring to. Deep troughs keep cutting into the west, all right? And that's why you look back over the last 7 days, some places in California, I've already talked about the snow, but we've had rainfall totals in the 4 to 6 inch range. Same thing up the I-5 corridor here. But if you notice, there's an area right in through here where we've just missed this. In each one of these systems that comes out of Colorado and quickly goes toward the Great Lakes, basically it's not slow enough like they sometimes are in spring to draw in a bunch of moisture out of the Gulf all the way back into this part of Texas. So instead, the moisture's kind of met right here by the front, and that's where the storms have taken off. So this particular map, again, showing you the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation, shows you both of those powerful and deadly storm systems here. But the issue that we've got going on here in the plains is drought expansion. And if you look at the 16-inch or 40 centimeter soil moisture values, parts of the high plains here are still very, very low. We have pockets in parts of the Midwest and the lower Mississippi River Valley, and of course the Mid-Atlantic getting back down into the Carolinas that are showing up dry. We've seen improvements in the soil moisture here as that snow melted on the very warm conditions that came through. But the questions are, how much is this map going to be changing as we go through the next few months? Because the latest drought monitor released this morning shows us a significant portion of the United States still in drought. Now what I want to do is I want to look for how much the drought has changed. So we're going to come into the change maps. This is just the drought change in the last week, but I'm interested in that longer term trend. And over the last 3 months, we've seen drought expand in this area and also over here in the parts of the Mid-Atlantic and into the southeast. Now, we're going to get quite a bit of precip coming up right in through this area, and a front's going to come through the eastern side of the country helping. But this is an area in the backside I'm not seeing too much in the way of precipitation for. This is it. Next 10 days. Stalled out boundary here at the end of this week delivers, maybe 1 to 3 inches of rainfall, and that does get into the Mid-South, into the Red River Valley. Got a system that's going to show up here in the Gulf and move toward Florida. That one's a little farther south than originally predicted. And more deep troughs keep cutting into the west, which is why we continue to see above average precip there, while little clippers run along the U.S.-Canada border through the prairie where it's brutally cold right now. But you notice there's a spot here in the high plains of the south getting into the Midwest that shows up on the drier side of this forecast. And also, things are quite mild there as well. Through the next 10 days, most of the coldest air tries to stay to the north. It comes out in shots, but it tries to stay here over the Canadian prairie where brutally cold air will be found. And there's a very mild forecast for the southern plains moving through the end of this month and to start next month. Now, all of this is associated with some changes we're seeing right now going on with La Nina. So what's going on with these ocean temperatures? A couple of things here. This area is kind of stabilized. We kept seeing the temperature stay about the same. There's been a little bit of cooling over here in Niña region 1 and 2. But what I'm most interested in is the trade winds that are controlling these ocean temperatures. Because ultimately, it tells me where the MJO is going to be. And that tells me how the momentum is transported out of the tropics, and that tells me how fast the jet stream is across the Pacific. Because it's meeting up with the colder water here, sending more of these troughs into the west coast. And we have no strong subtropical component of the jet stream to aid this. So this all really hinges on this energy and heat and momentum transport out of the tropics. And this is what I'm learning. When I just look over the next 15 days, so let's start here today on the 16th and go all the way to the end of the month. The La Nina and its signature, which normally has strong trade winds coming in this direction, where you don't see those blues and big blocks over here anymore. In fact, you see them over the Indian Ocean. Now, for the last, it feels like almost 90 days, we'd had more westerly winds coming out of the Indian Ocean, but now that flow's coming from this direction. So what this means is, right in this area, between where we're getting these westerly wind bursts, see them here, and where there's easterly winds going in that direction, there's a region of divergence at the surface. So the air is spreading out away from this area. And that results in this particular region in a lot of subsidence. You can see it maybe better by looking at this figure. This shows you what's called velocity potential. And the warmer colors represent positive velocity potential or sinking air. And as we get here into the end of this month, there's a lot of sinking air right there over phase 3 of the MJO. Now, what does all this mean? Why talk about this? Well, you look at these diagrams with me all the time that show you the position of the MJO, and it would appear that it's in phase 7, but it's not. What's going on is on the other side of the diagram in phase 3 over the Indian Ocean, there is a lot of subsidence. So it looks as though there's a lot of rising motion here in phase 7. And even the longer range models want to keep that in play. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, if we come back to this idea about the transport of that momentum, it's going to slow. We're not going to see a big extended Pacific jet anymore. And as a result, we do expect the pattern to get a little blocky. Now, where's the jet? Coming over this part of Japan. It then splits. Do you see that? Comes back together, flows zonally across the United States for the most part, and then there's a big block here in the North Atlantic. So there's a lot of meridional or north-south flow happening on the two parts of the ocean that flank North America. Now, again, the difference here would be if we could extend this jet farther in this direction, we'd have a much more volatile pattern, let that cold air out. It would really result in the development of a deep trough here over the Hudson Bay, and now we'd see that cold air coming out in a much more volatile pattern for the eastern half of the United States. But as it stands, this is where the jet stream ends up. Just taking you out a week from right now. See the ridge forming here and there? In fact, you can almost see an omega block setting up here, and even a high over low block there. So there's split flow. It's coming together in the west coast, and that's going to send all that moisture into the west. But ridging over the south keeps much of the south and southeast drier, but an active Canadian kind of clipper storm track. That's what I'm seeing. Now, how long does it last? Well, let's just take a look. Here's the newest long-range updates from the European model, looking only at the month of January. There will be chances, for that colder air to start to move through the upper Midwest into the Northeast. But the models are hanging on to persistence with mild conditions across a broad sector of the Cotton Belt. With deeper troughs in the west, they're not only seeing the colder than average conditions there, but take a look at this precipitation pattern. Above average precip. Now, the models did regain the active Ohio River Valley, Tennessee Valley path here. But what I'm concerned about, as we talked about at the beginning of this video, is the drought continuing to stay in place through the month of January in the southern plains. I think we're going to see a lot of clippers rolling through here. But overall, this pattern is not one that favors above average precipitation in the south. So active region here, active in the west, cold air at times coming out like this, but mild to the south. Now, right now, we got a pretty big cold front that just swept through. Take a look at this. This is comparing the temperatures right now. I'm recording this a little after 5 o'clock in the evening on on a Thursday here, comparing it to yesterday on Wednesday. So we've got temperatures 20 to 30 degrees colder than they were, but that's not going to last very long. That front sweeping through, and it's going to stall out right here. And that's what I want to show you. Let's do our multi-model analysis here. Through Thursday night, getting into Friday morning. Do you see where the front stalls? And that's where the rainfall is going to be tonight and into tomorrow, and it's in both models. Now, while that's happening, some light snow might move through the northern plains here, okay? But what we end up getting is a low that develops by Friday night to Saturday that moves into the northeast. The models are in much better agreement about the snow in the northeast now. See that? And that front just slowly moves from, this part of the Ohio Valley toward the Appalachian Mountains and back into the lower Mississippi River Valley. Both models got that. There's another system coming in Saturday night into the northwest as well. We're going to keep an eye on that one. Because as we play this forward into Sunday, high pressure builds in, little clipper system runs along, this part of the Canadian prairie, the front clears out. Meanwhile, another system starts to take shape right here in the Gulf of Mexico. But unlike earlier forecast this week, it stays mainly in the Gulf, cuts by the time we get into next, Monday, Tuesday over toward Florida, adding rain here to parts of Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. See it? And while that's all going on, remember, we still have a system sliding down the west coast early next week. And you can see in both models, that's really bringing in the moisture feed into California yet again. We'll take a look at those precip totals in a few moments. Once we get out here a little farther into next Wednesday and Thursday, the models do split up a bit on the pattern, and that's to be expected. With next Thursday, the European have a slower moving system through the Great Lakes. The GFS is a little quicker with it all the way into the northeast. But both models are attempting to keep the west on the active side of things as we move toward Christmas in this case. So let's take this and kind of put it all together into a couple of different maps here. Over the next 7 days, what kind of precip are we talking about in terms of snow? Well, into Ontario and into New England, we are expecting some places here to pick up better than 4 inches. But with overall milder conditions right in through here, we're not seeing much snow. And even to the north of it, this is pretty light snow. The system's cutting into the west, really adding it up here in the Cascade Range, getting up into parts of British Columbia. Same thing for the Northern Rockies here. But with that last system really cutting into California for the Klamath Mountains into the Sierra Nevada, we are also talking about another couple of feet of snow possible there. And there is good model agreement between the GFS and the European. Now, in terms of total precipitation, actually first, let's go take a look at snow. I'm going to take you all the way out until the 26th, and just to give you a fun map here to look at for who's going to be seeing snow in the next 10 days. This is a map showing the probability of getting an inch of snow between now and then. So we're just kind of looking here for those places that could get a little bit of the white stuff covering the ground. Of course, the amounts are much heavier north and west and into the northeast, but just gives us an idea. Now, let's come back to the precip side of it. Blow this up a little bit, show you the next week. Could pick up an inch to an inch and a half here. And then in the southeast, as that system comes out, just like that, as we showed. We're drier on this side. And we talked a lot about that, drier in the Four Corners states. But there's the chance for another 2 to 4 inches of rain in Northern California, coastal Oregon and Washington. Some of that does get into the Columbia Basin. But the southern extent of it seems to clip off the tail end of the San Joaquin Valley here with bringing in the moisture. But that's your next 7 days of total precip by the European. And there's decent enough model agreement between this and the GFS that I'm just going to show you the one model. Now, as we talked about, the pattern gets blocky by day 10. See the ridge setting up here? Dives down into this trough that cuts into the west. Ridging seems to sit here. Really, it's focused down farther over Mexico, but there's above normal heights there. But this trough developing here is going to let some of that cold air come out of the Canadian prairie. But unless there's a big, deep trough here, that cold air will not get far enough to the south. It'll stay mostly across the northern interior of the U.S., and I'll show you that in a second. But what we do get out of this is much above average precip here, but drier across the south compared to average where that ridge is going to sit. So this is, again, is precip compared to average for week 2, which gets us all the way up to December 30th. Let's finish up with a quick discussion on temperatures. Month-to-date temperature anomalies, December is shaping up to be a very mild month for most of the United States. But there is cold air that is going to get into the northern plains coming out of the Canadian prairie. See over the next 5 days where that is? But a ridge over the southeast in the near term keeps it mild. Day 5 through 10, that ridge backs up and redevelops over the southern plains, so very mild in Texas moving forward. But better chances of getting some colder air in the northern plains, into the Great Lakes, and into the northeast. By day 10 through 15, now we see a bit more of that advancement of that colder air. And just to make a point here, this is going to be a brutally cold go of it, finishing up the month of December throughout the Canadian prairie and parts of the west, while much of the cotton belt down here hangs on to mild conditions. So we'll keep watching all of this and kind of discuss where this pattern's heading, because at some point, should a low develop here and that blocky pattern in the North Pacific, North Atlantic break down, this cold air's got to go somewhere. And it might be associated with a polar vortex disruption in January. We'll watch all of it, and I'll keep you up to date. So have a good rest of your week and weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday. Thanks.